The gravel had not been raked in a fortnight, and Adela Wren noticed it before she noticed the house. She stood at the foot of the drive with her one box against her hip, and read the ground the way she read everything. The ruts where a cart had turned too sharp and nobody had smoothed them after. The weeds coming up bold through the shingle. A broken barrow left on its side by the gate lodge with rust already on the rim. A house tells you what it can afford before anyone opens the door. This one was telling her that it had stopped being able to afford attention, which is a different poverty from money, and often worse. "You'll be the reader," said the woman who came out to her. Not a servant by her dress, and not a lady either, somewhere in the difficult country between. "You're younger than the letter made you sound." "The letter didn't mention my age," Adela said. "No. It mentioned your voice. His lordship wants a voice that doesn't perform. He can't abide being read at, as though he were a child or a congregation." The woman looked her over once, plainly, and seemed to find nothing to object to. "I'm Mrs. Halloran. I kept house here before there was much house left to keep. You'll want to know the one rule before you go up, because everyone breaks it once, and only the wise break it never again. You do not tell the old man he is dying. He knows. He does not wish to be managed about it. If you nurse him with your face, he will send you back to the coach by nightfall. I wasn't hired to nurse him. You were hired to read to him. Good. Then read." Mrs. Halloran turned, and over her shoulder, in a voice worn smooth by long use, added the thing that would turn out to be the whole of it. "And when the son comes home, he will come home, though he swears otherwise. You are to remember that this house belongs to a dying man, and not to a living one, whatever the living one tells you. The living one has been away 4 years, and forfeits his opinions at the door." Adela filed that away without comment. She had learned young that the fastest road out of any household was to take a side in a quarrel she did not yet understand, and she had no intention of leaving. She had nowhere left that would have been called leaving for. Her father had been a cataloguer of libraries, a man who was paid to walk into a great house after a death and tell the heirs what their books were worth, which of them was a first issue, and which a made-up copy dressed to look like one, which quarto had its final blank leaf, and was therefore whole, and which had lost it, and was therefore worth a fraction of the boast. He had taught her the trade before she had any notion it was a trade, the way other fathers taught daughters the piano. And then he had died, owing money to men who did not care that his daughter could tell a cancelled leaf from an integral one at a glance. The trade was all she had kept. It was, as it happened, enough. The old man's room was at the top of the south stair, and it smelled of camphor and old paper and a fire kept too high. He was propped against a bank of pillows, with a book open face down on the counterpane, and he watched her come in with eyes that were the only young thing left in him. "You're the Wren girl," he said. "Halloran tells me you don't sing." "I read the words that are there, my lord. If the author put a song in, you'll get a song. Otherwise, no." Thank God. He shut his eyes a moment, as though that alone had been worth the coach fare they'd paid to bring her. The last one wept. At Cowper. Wept at Cowper, as though the man had died in the room. "Sit down," Not there. There where I can see the window behind you. I like to know what the weather's at while I'm being lied to by poets." He waited until she sat. "What did they tell you about me?" "That you're dying and don't wish to be managed about it." The old man laughed, a dry, surprised sound, as though he had not expected to that day. "Halloran said that? Good. Then we'll do very well. Read me the one with the marker in it. And when you come to a part you find foolish, you may stop and tell me so. The last one never told me anything was foolish. I began to suspect she couldn't tell." She picked up the book. It was a decent octavo, calf a little scuffed, and her thumb found the raised chords under the leather before her eyes found the page, and something in her settled that had not been settled since the coach. She knew where she was, with a book in her hands. She had always known where she was, with a book in her hands. She read to him for 3 weeks before the son came home. In those 3 weeks, she learned the house the way she had learned the drive, by what it had stopped doing. The long gallery was shut, and the pictures in it hung under Holland sheets, and nobody dusted the tops of the frames, because nobody went in. Half the bedrooms had their beds stripped to the ticking. The library, and here she had to be careful with herself, because the library was very fine and very neglected, and neglect in a library was a physical pain to her. The library had damp coming up one wall, and the books on the lower shelves of that wall were beginning to cockle at the corners, and a smell of foxing hung over the whole west end of it that told her a good deal of quiet ruin was going on behind the calf and the gilt. She began to go in there in the hour after the old man slept, at first only to look, and then, because she could not help herself, to work. She did not ask permission. That was not, in her experience, how you saved a book. You saved a book by getting it off the damp wall before the damp finished it, and you explained yourself afterward if anyone asked. And mostly nobody asked, because mostly nobody had noticed the book was dying in the first place. So she moved the worst of them, the ones already cockling, to the long table under the south window where the air moved, and she stood them open on their foredges, like little tents so the pages could breathe, 40 and 50 at a time, and she went along the row turning them a quarter turn twice a day, so no single position set a warp into them. The ones with mould already blooming she took apart from the sound ones entirely, because mould is a fire that spreads on paper, and you quarantine it, or you lose the shelf. She made a soft brush from a shaving brush she found in a disused dressing room, and she brushed the dry spores away from the gutter of each mouldy leaf outward, never inward, never across, working over a sheet of paper she burned after, so the spores she lifted did not simply resettle on the book beside it. It was slow. It was the kind of slow that has no visible result at the end of a day, and she did it anyway, an hour at a time. In the hour the old man slept, the son came home on a wet Tuesday in the last week of September, and the first Adela knew of it was the dogs. They set up in the yard the particular noise dogs make for their own person and no other, and then there were boots on the stone below, and a voice she had not heard before saying something short to Mrs. Halloran, and Mrs. Halloran saying something shorter back. Adela was in the library, with a mould-bloomed quarles held open on its tents, and she did not go down. It was not her homecoming. She turned the book a quarter turn and went on. He found her there an hour later. She heard him in the doorway before she saw him. A stillness in the room that had not been there, the dogs gone quiet at his heel. And she looked up from the long table with the shaving brush in her hand and a smudge of spore dust on her wrist. And she saw a big man in a wet coat, dark, not old, with a face that had decided long ago to give nothing away, and had kept the decision so long it had set. He was looking at the tables, at the 50 open books tented along the south window, at the quarantined stack, at the brush. "Who told you to touch these?" he said. It was not quite a question. There was no heat in it, which was somehow worse than heat. "Nobody," Adela said. "They were dying. The wall behind you has damp in it, and the bottom 3 shelves are wicking it up, and another winter would have taken the lot. I moved the ones that could still be saved. I didn't move anything that wasn't already going. You're the reader. I'm the reader. My father hired a voice. He didn't hire a..." He stopped, because the word he wanted was not there, and looked again at the tents, at the careful outward strokes of dust on the burning sheet, at the mould stack set well apart from the sound. Something crossed his face that she could not name, and that he shut down before it finished. "Where did you learn to do that?" "From my father. He catalogued libraries. You learn to save them the same hour you learn to price them. It's the same knowledge from 2 ends. She set the brush down, because her hand had begun to want to defend itself with it, and she did not intend to defend anything. "If you want me to stop, my lord, say so, and I'll put them back on the wet wall, and they'll be gone by spring. And that will be your affair, and not mine. But I won't pretend I think it's the right thing, because I don't, and your father hired me on the strength of not pretending." The Duke of Hartfell looked at her for a long moment. Rain moved on the window behind her. Somewhere below, a dog turned around 3 times and lay down with a thump they could both hear through the floor. "Don't put them back," he said, and turned and was gone. And that was the whole of their first conversation. Mrs. Halloran caught her on the stair that evening with a lamp in her hand, and the particular look of a woman who has been waiting in a passage on purpose. "You've met him, then?" "I've met him. And you're still here, which is more than the last 3 managed." The old woman held the lamp a little higher. "I'll tell you what I told none of them, because you didn't weep, and you didn't curtsy yourself into the wallpaper. That man came back for one reason, and it is not love of his father, though the love is there, buried where he keeps things. He came back because he swore 4 years ago he never would, and he has spent 4 years finding out that a man who won't come home doesn't stop having a home. He just stops being in it. Whatever passed between him and the old man, it was bad, and it was public, and half the county still tells it wrong. Don't ask him, don't ask me. But don't you go thinking he's cold either, because I dandled that man when he was small enough to fit in a copper. And he is not cold. He is careful. There is all the difference in the world, and the world never troubles to learn it. Adela thought about the 50 tented books and the single word, "Don't put them back," and thought that she had already learned it, though she did not say so. The meetings began, as such things do, under the cover of business. The old man wished to know how his library did. He had heard, from Halloran, from the boots on the stair, from whatever channel serves the bedridden, and serves them faster than the post, that the reader had taken his books in hand, and it woke in him an interest that had been asleep for years. So it became a thing in the afternoons. She would come up from the library with a book she had brought back from the edge, and she would tell him what she had done and why, and he would lie against his pillows with his young eyes bright and make her tell it properly, in the words of the trade, sparing him nothing. It had the red rot, she told him one afternoon, holding up a calf-bound folio whose spine she had dressed. The leather goes to powder. You rub it, and it comes away like brick dust on your thumb. There's no curing it once it's begun. The tanning's failing from the inside, and you can't put back what the acid's eaten. But you can consolidate what's left, and you can stop handling it by the spine, and you can give it a box, so the next 100 years pass over it gentler than the last 30 did. She turned the folio so he could see the joint. This one will outlive all of us now. It won't get better. It simply won't get worse as fast. Like its owner, the old man said, dry. I wasn't going to say so. No. That's why I let you stay. He closed his eyes. Go on. What else is dying down there? The Duke was often in the room for these afternoons, or near it. He would come in on some pretext. A letter for his father to see, a question about a tenant, and then not leave, and stand at the window with his back to them looking at the wet park, and listen. She knew he listened because of the once or twice he forgot himself and asked a question, a real one, about a book, in a voice with the carefulness momentarily gone out of it. And each time he heard himself do it, he stopped and went back to the window, as though he had caught his own hand somewhere it should not be. The wound she learned by accident, and from the old man, and not all at once. My son thinks I'm dying to spite him, the old man said one grey afternoon, when the Duke had just left the room, and his boots were still going down the stair. He's wrong, but I see why he thinks it. We said things, he and I, 4 years back, in front of the whole assembly at Marlott, the magistrates, the parson, half the county in their good coats. His mother had been dead a month. He wanted to sell the Aldous land to clear what the drainage had cost, and I called him a coward in front of them all for wanting to sell his mother's ground before she was cold. And he said, the old man stopped. His hands moved on the counterpane. He said I had never once, in 30 years, told him I was glad he was born. And the terrible thing, the thing I have had 4 years to sit with, is that he was right. I hadn't. I don't know that I was. And then he left, and I let him leave, because I would rather have been proved right than have my son. And that is the truth about me. And you may read me something now, because I find I have said enough. Adela read to him. She did not offer him a word of comfort, because comfort was managing, and he had a rule. But she read very gently that afternoon, and the old man knew the difference, and when she left he said thank you in a voice he did not usually use. That was the wound, then. Not a dead woman who wanted his house. Not money he had lost for other people, a thing his father had failed to say for 30 years, and a thing the son had said back in front of the county, both of them right, both of them unforgivable, and neither of them able to take a syllable of it back. And the old man dying now with the syllables still standing in the air between them, 40 miles from where the sun had gone and never once written. The first gift she did not recognize as one. She had been wanting a particular thing for the mould work, a run of fine muslin, to make proper covers for the tented books, so the dust from the damp wall stopped resettling on them overnight. And she had said as much to nobody, or thought she had, though she may have said it half aloud to the old man in passing. And then one morning there was muslin. A whole bolt of it, good and soft and clean, left on the long table in the library, with no word and no note, as though the house had simply decided to produce it. She asked Mrs. Halloran, who said she knew nothing of any muslin, and said it in a way that meant she knew everything, and had been told to know nothing. Adela made her covers, and said no more about it. And if she thought about the big, careful man standing at the window with his back to her, listening to every word she said about her books, she did not let the thought get very far. The second meeting that drifted began over a foxed Ovid, and ended somewhere else. He had come in with the letter pretext again, and his father was asleep, and so instead of leaving, he stayed. And she showed him, because he asked, how you could tell a stain that was only age from a stain that was still alive and spreading. He bent over the book beside her. He had washed the road off him by now, and he smelled of cold air and horse and plain soap, and his hands, when he turned the leaf as she showed him, were more careful than she had expected of a man that size. And she thought, with the small, clear part of her mind that never stopped appraising anything, that Mrs. Halloran had been exactly right. Careful, not cold. The whole man was built on care he would not name, the way the whole house was built on a grief nobody would say aloud. You do this as though the book could feel it, he said. The book can't feel anything. I do it as though it could, because that's the only way to do it well. You can't half care for a thing and save it. It knows. She heard herself and amended. It doesn't know. I mean that you know. There's no saving anything by halves. You're in or the thing is lost. He was quiet a moment. That's a hard rule to live by. It's the only one I've found that works, she said, and turned the leaf, and did not look up, because she had the sudden sense that if she looked up, she would see him not looking at the book at all, and she was not ready for what that would cost either of them. The ease came on a Sunday, when the rain had finally stopped. The old man was having a good day. He had them still bright islands, and he wanted the window open and the smell of the wet garden in the room. And he wanted, of all things, to argue. So the three of them argued for the better part of 2 hours about nothing at all, about whether a book you have never read can be said to be yours, about whether the old man's own grandfather had been a great collector or merely a rich man who bought by the yard, about whether Adela's habit of standing the books up like tents made the library look like a laundry, which the Duke maintained it did, and Adela maintained was the price of not letting them rot. And the old man sided now with one, and now with the other, purely for the pleasure of keeping the thing alive. You've no romance in you, girl, the old man said. You'd stand Shakespeare himself on his foredge to dry. I'd stand him quicker than most. He's worth the saving. Hear that? The old man said to his son, delighted. She'd manhandle the bard and thank herself for it. She'd manhandle you, sir, if you foxed at the edges, the Duke said, and it was so unexpected, so nearly a joke from a man she had not seen come near one, that Adela laughed before she could stop herself, a real laugh. And the old man laughed, and the Duke looked briefly astonished at himself. And then, not quite smiling, he did not seem to have the machinery for it fully. Let the corner of it show. When I was a boy, the old man said, into the warmth of it, he used to mend things. Did he tell you that? No, he wouldn't. Clocks, locks, the pump in the low yard, the hinge on the gallery door that whistled for 20 years until he was 12 and took it apart on the schoolroom floor and put it back so it never whistled again. His mother said we'd raised a blacksmith by mistake. He has the hands for it. Always did. Show her your hands, boy. They're the only honest thing about you. That's enough, the Duke said. But there was no edge on it, and he did not hide his hands. And Adela looked at them where they rested on his knee, big and scarred across the knuckles in the way of a man who has taken a great many things apart to see how they failed. And she thought, there it is. That is the whole of him. He mends what is broken, and cannot say a kind word to save his life. And his father is the same. And they have been breaking each other for 30 years, for want of a language neither was ever taught. Nobody punctured it. The window stood open, and the wet garden came in, and for a while nobody said anything at all, and that was the best of it. The three of them in a warm room, with the rain stopped, and nothing needing to be said, and no one reaching for a joke to make the quiet safe. The house began to come round to her, one person at a time. The first was a housemaid named Tib, 15 and frightened of her own feet, who Adela had found crying in the still room over a broken dish, and had helped sweep up without a word to anyone, and without asking whose fault it was. Weeks later, Tib stopped her in the passage, twisting her apron into a rope, and said all in a rush, "Miss, I wanted—" The master's father, when he rings in the night and Mrs. Halloran's abed, I can sit with him now. I learned it watching you, how you don't fuss him. I used to be feared to. I'm not feared now. I wanted to say it was you learned me that." And Adela, who had not known the girl had watched her at all, said that the old man was lucky to have her, and meant it, and Tib went scarlet with pleasure, and fled. The second was Halloran herself, which was a longer siege, and a stranger one. She came into the library on a raw evening when Adela was working late, and she set down a cup of something hot at Adela's elbow without being asked. And she stood a while, watching the brush go outward, outward, over the burning sheet. "My mother did that," Halloran said at last. "Not with books. With linen, the good linen that went spotted in a wet press. Brushed it out just so, always away from the weave, never into it. She said you never drive the trouble deeper in. You always lift it out and away, in life as in linen." She was quiet a moment. "I didn't think there was another soul left who did things the slow, right way. Everyone's in such a hurry to have the thing done. You're not. There's no fast way to save something," Adela said. "There's only the way that works, and the way that looks like work." Halloran nodded slowly, as though something had been confirmed that she had suspected for some weeks. "He watches you, you know," she said, in the doorway. "Thinks I don't see him not come in." And then, Before Adela could find an answer to that, the old woman took up her lamp and went, leaving the hot cup and the sentence both behind her in the cold library. That night, alone with the tented books and the cooling cup, Adela let herself understand the thing she had been not understanding for a month, and having understood it, she took it out and looked at it plainly, because she had never in her life found that a thing got smaller by being refused a look. You are somewhere warm, I hope, wherever you're hearing this. A fire near you, or a good coat, or just the ordinary roof that a great many people in this story would have traded a great deal to be sure of. Stay a while. The rain's stopped in the park, and there's a long way still to go, and I'd be glad of the company. She loved him. That was the plain shape of it, and there was no dressing it as anything kinder to herself. She sat with the cooling cup, and named it without flinching, the way she named red rot and foxing, and the difference between a stain that was dead and one that was still eating. She loved the careful, ruined man who mended hinges and could not mend a sentence, who left muslin on a table and would sooner die than admit it, who stood in doorways he could not make himself enter. And it did not matter in the smallest degree, because she had understood, in the same clear hour, what his kindness to her actually was, and it was not what a foolish woman would have made of it. He was grateful. She had saved his father's books, the last thing of his mother's the house still held whole, and gratitude in a man like that came out sideways, as muslin, as a joke risked and half drawn back, as a question about a stain. And more than grateful, he was lonely to the marrow, 4 years lonely, a man who had cut himself off from the one house that was his, and found out too late that a man does that only to himself. She was the first person in 4 years who had spoken to him without knowing the county's wrong version of his story, without pity and without the good coats, and he had mistaken the relief of that for something it was not, because a starving man will mistake any warmth for love. That was all it was. He would bury his father, and he would marry some woman with land whose edges marched with the aldous ground, some woman who would mend the estate the way Adela mended books, and she, Adela, would go on to the next library and the next dying collection, because a woman who owns one box does not get to keep the warm rooms she passes through. She had known that at 15. She had built her whole steadiness on knowing it. So she did not weep, or not for long, and she did not decide anything, and she did not let herself imagine a single scene in which it went otherwise, because imagining was a country you could get lost in and never work again. She finished the muslin cover she was stitching. She drank the cup Halloran had left, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway, because to pour it out seemed a waste of a kindness. She banked the library fire and went up to her narrow bed, and in the morning she was at the tables again with the brush. Outward, outward, and if her eyes were tired, no one who mattered was awake to see it. And by the time the Duke came to his father's room at noon, she was entirely herself, and read the old man 3 cantos in a voice that did not perform, and that was the whole of what she permitted herself. The old man died 3 weeks later, on a still bright morning with the first frost silvering the park, and he died well, which is to say, without fuss, and with his young eyes open. and the last thing he asked for was not his son and not the parson, but a page of the Ovid she had saved, read in the voice that didn't sing, and then, before the ground over him had settled, the trouble came, as trouble does, when a great house changes hands, and there is money owing, and a will that names things. His name was Mr. Pledger, and he had been the old Duke's man of business for 19 years. And he arrived from the county town 2 days after the funeral, with a black case and a manner of soft, sorrowful competence. And he laid before the new Duke, in the estate office with the door open, and Halloran and 2 clerks and a magistrate present as witnesses to the reading, an account of the estate's affairs that did not balance. And that did not balance, he explained gently, because a great deal of money that should have been in the funds had gone, over 4 years, no one quite knew where, while the old Duke lay ill and inattentive, and his heir was abroad and not answering letters. "I raise it," Pledger said, soft, sorrowful, his hands folded on the black case, "only because it will be raised. Better here, among friends, than by the creditor's men. £4,000, near enough, gone out of the London account in small sums over 4 years, and I could not stop it, for I had not the authority, and his lordship, your father, would not hear of his affairs being questioned. I kept every letter. I did what a servant could. But the money is gone, and the tenants' rents with it half spent before they were in, and someone must say where it went, and the world will not be gentle in the asking." And he looked, with his soft, sorrowful face, not at the Duke at all. He looked at Adela, who had been 3 months in the house, and had had the run of the library, and the old man's confidence, and everyone knew the handling of a great many valuable books. "I accuse no one," said Mr. Pledger, in the voice of a man accusing someone. "I say only that the collection was inventoried at 4,000 and more before this person came, and that some of the finest of it is not on the shelves now, and that I should be failing in my duty if I did not ask the question the creditors will ask. Where are the books, Miss Wren, and where is the money they were worth?" The room went very quiet. The magistrate looked at his hands. And Adela understood, with the cold clarity she brought to everything, that the muslin and the tented pages and the outward brush had all been leading here, and that a woman with 1 box and no name and a dead father who owed money was exactly the shape of person the world keeps a fault ready-made for. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life found that volume carried a fact any further than quiet did. "You inventoried the collection at £4,000, she said. "May I see the inventory?" Pledger passed it across, soft and certain. She turned the leaves without hurry, and the room watched her do it, and she found what she had known she would find because she had spent 3 months with those shelves. And 3 months is a long time to a person who reads books the way other people read faces. "This inventory," she said, "was made from the old catalogue, which was made by your father's grandfather's librarian in the year the frontispiece here is dated, and it has not been checked against the actual shelves in 40 years. I know that because 1/3 of the valuations in it are for copies this library does not contain, and by the evidence never did. It lists a Caxton the house never owned, valued alone at £800, and it lists 2 folios, twice, under different titles, once by the title on the spine, and once by the title on the leaf, and it counts them as 4 books worth 400 when they are 2 books worth 2. The £4,000 was never on these shelves. It was on this paper, and it was wrong on this paper before I was born. She set the inventory down and drew toward her. From the case of estate books that had stood in that office the whole time, in plain sight, touched by everyone and read by no one, the old Duke's own account book. The one he had kept himself in his own hand, the hand she knew better than her own by now, from 3 months of his marginalia. You said £4,000 went out of the London account in small sums over 4 years, she said. It did. Here it is, entered in his own hand, every quarter, because whatever else was failing in him, his hand and his sums never did. It did not vanish. He gave it away to the Aldous tenants, whose drainage failed the year his wife died, and who could not pay their rents and were not made to. Here and here and here, forgiven quarter by quarter. And the forgiveness entered, like the honest man he was, so that anyone who troubled to read his own book, instead of your 40-year-old catalogue, would know exactly where every shilling went. You did not read his book, Mr. Pledger. You read the old one, because the old one had a hole in it the size of a stranger, and I was the stranger, and a hole wants filling. It was Halloran who spoke then, from the door, at a cost the whole room could see, for she had served the estate her life long, and did not lightly call its man of business a liar to his face. I carried some of those sums myself, she said, her voice not quite steady, to the Aldous cottages, in a covered basket, because his lordship didn't want it known he was soft. Mr. Pledger knew. He signed the receipts. He knew all along where the money went, for he wrote the letters that sent me. Something happened then in Pledger's soft, sorrowful face. The certainty in it did not break so much as stopped working, the way a clock stops, mid-tick, with the hands still up. He began, his lordship's charity was never, and the sentence did not arrive anywhere, and he tried another. In 19 years of faithful. And that one died too against the silence of a room that had already, quietly, finished with him. He was a man whose whole position had been the confidence of his voice, and he heard the voice fail, and he understood before anyone said a word that the years of service he had been about to invoke would land on nothing, because the woman he had meant to bury under them had just read his 40-year-old paper as easily as she read a foxed leaf, and everyone had watched her do it. He gathered his black case. His hands were not quite steady on the clasp. Adela could have finished him. The room would have let her. The room, having swung, was hungry to see the soft, sorrowful man torn the rest of the way down. And she had the facts to do it, and the standing now to be believed. She looked at him a moment, at the grey in his hair, at the 19 years, at the fear underneath the ruin of his certainty, which was only ever the fear of a man who saw the estate changing hands, and his own place in it gone, and reached, badly, for a stranger to blame before the blame could land on him. "You'll have kept the receipts," she said quietly. "Being a careful man. Give them to his lordship, and the accounts will close clean, and there need be no more said of where the money went." She let that sit. That's all that need be said of any of it. And that was the last thing spoken in that room, for she gathered her own papers, and Pledger gathered his, and nobody moved to stop him leaving, and nobody moved to praise her, and the Mercy sat in the cold office like the only warm thing in it. That evening, she began to pack her box. She did it in the small, cold room they had given her over the stable arch, by one candle, with the frost thickening on the little window, and she did it because the thing was finished. The old man was dead. His books were as saved as they would ever be, tented and covered and boxed against the next hard winter, and a house that had lost its master did not keep on a reader, with no one left to read to. She had proved where the money went. She had not proved she had any further place under this roof, and she was too clear-eyed to confuse the one with the other. So she folded her 2 other dresses and set her father's brushes on top of them, and she took down from the window ledge the single foxed leaf of Ovid the old man had asked for at the end, which she had kept, and which was the nearest thing to a wage of the heart she had ever let herself pocket. Mrs. Halloran came up, because of course she did, with a lamp and a face like weather. You're going? There's no reader wanted where there's no one to read to. I've stayed in enough houses to know the shape of the door closing. It's no unkindness. It's only true. You could ask him. I could not. Adela folded the last dress. A woman who asks to be kept has already lost the thing she's asking for. Whatever I am in this house, I won't be that. I'll go to the next library and the next dying collection, and I'll do good work because the work is real, whatever else isn't. And that has been enough for me since I was 15, and it will be enough for me now. She heard the theme of her own life come out of her mouth as she said it, the thing she had built her steadiness on. There's no saving anything by halves. You're in, or the thing is lost. And she had gone all the way in, on this house and the man in its doorways, and so she would lose it all the way, cleanly, and not stand about being pitied at the edge of it. Tell him I said the library will hold now, if the damp walls seem to before spring. Tell him that, not the rest. Halloran looked at her a long moment and did not argue, which was the great kindness of her, and went down. And Adela closed the box. He came to find her an hour later, in the frost, at the foot of the stable stair, when the packing was long done and the candle nearly out. A different hour, a different room, and he had had to come the whole cold way across the yard to do it, which she understood when she saw his face had not been easy for a man who did not go into rooms. He was terrible at it. That was how she knew it was true. The books, he said, and stopped. No, not the books. He put his scarred hands out and had nothing to do with them, and put them away again. My father never once told me he was glad. I told you that. He told you that. 4 years I stayed away over a thing neither of us would say. He dragged the next words up from somewhere they did not want to leave. And you came into this house, and you saved the one thing of my mother's it had left. And you never asked me for a kind word. And I stood in doorways like a coward, and gave you muslin because I hadn't I couldn't. He stopped again. The frost stood on both their breaths. I won't be, my father. I won't let you go 40 miles off, and never say it. Stay. Not as the reader. I'm asking you to... I'm asking. Stay. I've said it worse than any man ever said it, and I'll not say it better, but I've said it, and I'm glad you were born, which is the thing that was never once said in this house, and I find I can say it easiest to you. And Adela Wren, who had priced her own leaving to the last shilling, and never once let herself imagine this, found that the small, clear appraising part of her mind had nothing to say at all, for the first time in her life, and that the silence where it had been was the warmest room she had ever stood in. "You're glad I was born?" she said when she could. "I am. God help me, I'm no good at it, but I am." "Then you'd best keep me," she said, "for I'm in, and I've told you there's no saving anything by halves." And she saw the words land, saw him understand that she had known all along, and stayed all the same, and he crossed the last of the frost between them, and she let him. And it was not careful at all. They married in the spring, when the damp wall had been opened, and dried and lined, and the library came back to life the way a fallow field does, all at once, and then steadily. Halloran ran the wedding as she ran everything, from the side, letting nothing be seen to be difficult. Tib sat with the household in her good cap and cried, though not at Cowper. Pledger was not there, but the accounts had closed clean and quiet as promised, and he kept his place another year, and then took a smaller one nearer his sister, diminished, tolerated, released into a life he could actually live, which was more than he had meant to leave her, and the old man's foxed leaf of Ovid went into a frame at last, and hung in the library where the light was good, at the height of her own hand. He never did learn to say the warm things easily, but she would come home from a far shelf to find a thing already done. A lamp moved to the right side of her chair, a hinge that had whistled for years gone suddenly silent, and she found she could read a whole language in a mended hinge, and that it said, in the only words the house had ever had for it, the thing that had waited 30 years to be said. So, a house that had stopped being able to afford attention, and 2 men in it who could mend anything but a sentence. Was it the books she saved, do you think? Or was it the saying, at the last, of the one plain thing? "Come back, and I'll tell you another." There's always another house, and always, if you know how to read the ground at the foot of the drive, a way in.